All right, so previously we talked about measures of center in our statistics. Now we're going to talk about measures of variation. So a measure of variation is a measure that describes the distribution of a data set. So kind of where all of our data points are located. So the range is one of our measures of variation, and it's simply the difference of the greatest value and the least value, right? So for example, if you had a bunch of tests and your highest score was 100, but your lowest score was 40, then the range of all of your test scores would be 100 minus 40, which is 60. So that shows you that there's a pretty big range between your two scores. So let's look at this data set here, right? We've got all these numbers. Now they're not written in least to greatest order, so we might want to do that first. And then we can find our range. So from least to greatest, we would have, before that we have 5, and then 6.25, and then 8. Then we've got 10, and then 11. Then we have 12.5. Then we have 14. And we have 15.5. And 16.25. And 18.5. So these are all a bunch of different numbers. Now the range, again, is just the difference between the greatest and the least. So what is the difference between these two numbers? Well, 18.5 minus 5 is 13.5. So our range is 13.5. And again, that's telling us, right, from here to here is a distance of 13.5. Now in general, right, the range can measure the variability of something, right? So if you had, let's say, you've got let's look at test scores, right? One student has test scores of 80, 82, 83, 83, and 84, right? So this student, out of these 5 test scores, the range, 84 minus 80, is 4. Sorry, 84 minus 80 is 4. Now, let's say another student has scores of 60, 70, 80, 81, and 100. Right, so we can see this student does have one score that's much higher than anything the first student scored, right? They have a 100 on their test, on one of them. But if we find the range, again, that's 100 minus 60, right? This student's range is 40. So the range tells us about the variation in the scores. So probably you want to be more consistent. So this first student with the scores of 80, 82, 83, 83, 84 has very consistent test scores. They can know going into a test kind of what to expect to get. This student, on the other hand, with a range of 40, that's a wide swing. They could score any number of things on a test score. So a smaller range tells us something is all closer together, whereas a bigger range means the data is quite spread out. So next we're going to talk about quartiles. So we talked before about the median, which divides our data in half, right? The median is that exact middle point. So quartiles divide our data into 4 equal parts, right? So we can find our median first, and then that gives us 2 halves of our data, and then we'll find the fourths of that. So that might sound confusing. Let's just look at an example here. So here's a bunch of data already written from least to greatest. So we have 18, 21, 22, 24, 28, 30, 31, 32, 36, and 37. So we can find our median, right? We'll work our way from the outside to the inside. And, right, we have 2 numbers in the middle here. So that would give us a median halfway between 28 and 30, which would be 29. Right? So our median would be here at 29. And then that gives us 2 halves, right? We've got this lower half here, and then we have the upper half. And each of those can be broken into their own halves, right? So that would give us quarters to our data. So in other words, right, if we were to work our way from the outside to the inside here, we would get 22 as this midpoint here. So this 22 would be what we call Q1, right? So we're breaking this into 4 quarters. So 22 marks Q1. That median could also be called Q2. And then if we find the middle point of our upper half, right, working our way to the middle, we get Q3 at 32, right? So we've broken our data into 4 equal parts. So Q1 here is 22 and Q3 is 32. And you can see, right, from here to here is the middle half of our data, right? So we have a total of, I'm spending way too much time coloring this all in unnecessarily. But you can see, right, we have a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 data points. Okay, now our interquartile range, our IQR, shows us that middle half of our data. So it shows us this middle 6 points. And the range between those two is simply Q3 minus Q1. So 32 minus 22. So we get an IQR, an interquartile range of 10.